It begins in silence, a kind of aching, timeless silence that isn't just the absence of sound, but the presence of something missing. A voice, a woman, a life. If you walk the streets of Ann Arbor, Michigan today, you won't hear her name echoing in coffee shops or pinned to street signs. There's no statue, no plaque. But once upon a time, in the trembling pause between the beats of America's post-war dream, she was there. Elizabeth Eaton Converse, known to those few who truly knew her as Connie, a woman so far ahead of her time that even time forgot her, until it didn't. Born in 1924 in Laconia, New Hampshire, Connie Converse grew up in a quiet, devout Baptist household. The daughter of a strict minister, her early life was a prayer whispered into the rural void of Depression-era New England. But inside Connie, something else stirred. A different rhythm, a rebellion in hushed tones, a searching for meaning beyond dogma, beyond expectations, beyond place. She read books voraciously, she won awards in school, and by the time she earned a scholarship to Mount Holyoke College, she seemed poised to fulfill a promising traditional future. But halfway through, Connie did something she would do again and again throughout her life. She vanished. She dropped out, disappeared from the institution, and reappeared in the most unlikely of places, New York City. It was the late 1940s, and the war had ended. The skyline was rebuilding. The jazz was louder. Men were returning home. Women were being pushed back into the kitchen. But not Connie. By the early 1950s, she was living in a small apartment on Grove Street in Greenwich Village, surrounded by poets, philosophers, painters, and dreamers. Her room overlooked fire escapes and smokestacks. Her bed doubled as a chair. Her desk was littered with cigarette butts and empty coffee cups. But inside those four walls, something was happening, something the world would not understand for another 50 years. She had no record deal, no stage name, no entourage, just a second-hand guitar, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and a voice like no one had heard before. Her songs were unlike anything of her time, sparse, raw, literary. They weren't about moonlight or boyfriends or dancing. They were about loneliness, about existential dread, about the failure of connection and the strange, terrible joy of being alive. She sang about empty bottles of gin, men who don't come home, sailors in the bar at the end of the world. She didn't write for radio. She wrote for ghosts. By 1954, she had recorded dozens of songs. Folk tunes layered with melancholy, cryptic metaphors, and sharp wit. She sent tapes to radio stations. She mailed songs to friends. She even appeared once, only once, on CBS morning television with Walter Cronkite's crew, performing live in a studio where the cameras whirred and the lights burned white-hot. But it didn't lead to fame, or fortune, or even a second appearance. The industry didn't know what to do with her. A female singer-songwriter, decades before that term meant anything. And so she kept writing, alone, into the void. And then, just as quickly as she had emerged, she disappeared again. The year was 1955. There was no national search, no flashing headlines, no police investigation. She simply stopped. No more music, no more performances, no trace. Just a slow erasure. Her friends stopped hearing from her. Her neighbors saw her less and less. The fire escape windows stayed dark, and eventually, even her name faded from memory. Except for one man. In the mid-2000s, nearly 50 years later, a music historian named Dan Zula stumbled upon a reel-to-reel tape in the possession of his friend Gene Deitch, a former animator and underground music collector, who had recorded Connie in his kitchen in the early 50s. Dan played the tape, and something about the voice, the raw sadness, the aching wit, the strange elegance, stopped him cold. This wasn't just another forgotten folk singer. This was something else, something haunting, something intimate, like reading a diary left behind in a crumbling attic, like watching someone disappear in real time through melody and rhyme. Dan and his team tracked down more tapes, more fragments, letters, notebooks, songs never heard, and slowly they stitched her ghost back together. In 2009, the album How Sad, How Lovely was quietly released. It didn't explode, but it didn't vanish either. Musicians whispered about it. Critics wrote reviews that read like love letters. Songs were covered, remixed, reimagined, and slowly, as if rising from the depths of some deep, cold lake, the legend of Connie Converse began to surface. A woman born in the wrong era. A voice meant for a time that didn't yet exist. But even as her music reappeared, the woman herself was still missing. That was the question. Where had she gone, and why? The final years of her known life are like brittle paper, faint pencil marks. She moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan in the early 1960s following her brother, a professor. She worked as a secretary. She edited academic journals. She attended poetry readings and wore long coats and smoked alone on benches. She stopped playing guitar. She stopped writing music. By the late 1970s, she was unraveling. Letters from this time reveal a woman slipping through the seams of herself. She wrote of chronic pain, of depression, of a world she could no longer connect to. In one note, she wrote, "Human society fascinates me and awes me and fills me with grief and joy. I just can't find my place to plug into it." She wasn't suicidal exactly, not in the typical sense, but she was done, tired, ready for something else. In August of 1974, just days after her 50th birthday, she packed her belongings into her Volkswagen Beetle, wrote a series of farewell letters to friends and family, and drove away. She was never seen again. No license plate ever surfaced, no credit card, no death certificate, no phone call, no note found in a drawer. She had told her family not to look for her, and they didn't. Not really, because deep down they believed she didn't want to be found. And maybe she didn't. Some say she drove off a cliff. Some say she changed her name, started over. Some say she joined a commune, died in the desert, took up painting in a tiny European village. But none of those theories have proof, just shadows, just possibilities, just the echo of a woman who wrote songs nobody heard, lived a life nobody understood, and then disappeared so completely that even her memory required rediscovery. And yet, somehow, her voice survived. The car was packed. One Volkswagen Beetle, a few boxes, notebooks, a guitar maybe. Some said she took it, others believed she left it behind. Too painful, too final. But what we do know is that on a quiet summer morning in August 1974, Connie Converse backed out of her driveway in Ann Arbor and was never seen again. No one knows where she went. No one knows if she ever stopped driving. The letters she left behind were calm, not desperate, not frenzied, just quiet, like her songs. She thanked her loved ones. She expressed a deep fatigue with the world, a hunger for rest, a desire to start over or to end. There were no clues in her bank account, no activity, no sightings. Just a silence so absolute it felt orchestrated, as if she had rehearsed her disappearance. But that's not the end. That's only the middle. Because years later, something strange started happening. In 2004, Gene Deitch, the animator who once lived in New York and recorded Connie in his kitchen, was cleaning out a drawer in his Prague studio when he found an old reel marked simply Connie. He
He didn't remember the details. The tape had sat there for decades, forgotten. But something compelled him to send it to a friend in the States, Dan Hoodla. Dan was a musician, archivist, and audio engineer. When he played the reel for the first time, the room stopped breathing. The tape hissed, and then her voice. Soft, cracked, unmistakable. It wasn't like hearing an old folk singer. It was like hearing a ghost whisper something only you were meant to hear. Dan couldn't stop listening. Then he started researching, and that research turned into an obsession.
She stopped writing music. By the late 1970s, she was unraveling. Letters from this time reveal a woman slipping through the seams of herself. She wrote of chronic pain, of depression, of a world she could no longer connect to. In one note, she wrote, "Human society fascinates me and awes me and fills me with grief and joy. I just can't find my place to plug into it." She wasn't suicidal exactly, not in the typical sense, but she was done, tired, ready for something else. In August of 1974, just days after her 50th birthday, she packed her belongings into her Volkswagen Beetle, wrote a series of farewell letters to friends and family, and drove away. She was never seen again. No license plate ever surfaced, no credit card, no death certificate, no phone call, no note found in a drawer. She had told her family not to look for her, and they didn't. Not really, because deep down they believed she didn't want to be found. And maybe she didn't. Some say she drove off a cliff. Some say she changed her name, started over. Some say she joined a commune, died in the desert, took up painting in a tiny European village. But none of those theories have proof, just shadows, just possibilities, just the echo of a woman who wrote songs nobody heard, lived a life nobody understood, and then disappeared so completely that even her memory required rediscovery. And yet, somehow, her voice survived. The car was packed. One Volkswagen Beetle, a few boxes, notebooks, a guitar maybe. Some said she took it, others believed she left it behind. Too painful, too final. But what we do know is that on a quiet summer morning in August 1974, Connie Converse backed out of her driveway in Ann Arbor and was never seen again. No one knows where she went. No one knows if she ever stopped driving. The letters she left behind were calm, not desperate, not frenzied, just quiet, like her songs. She thanked her loved ones. She expressed a deep fatigue with the world, a hunger for rest, a desire to start over or to end. There were no clues in her bank account, no activity, no sightings. Just a silence so absolute it felt orchestrated, as if she had rehearsed her disappearance. But that's not the end. That's only the middle. Because years later, something strange started happening. In 2004, Gene Deitch, the animator who once lived in New York and recorded Connie in his kitchen, was cleaning out a drawer in his Prague studio when he found an old reel marked simply Connie. He didn't remember the details. The tape had sat there for decades, forgotten. But something compelled him to send it to a friend in the States, Dan Hoodla. Dan was a musician, archivist, and audio engineer. When he played the reel for the first time, the room stopped breathing. The tape hissed, and then her voice. Soft, cracked, unmistakable. It wasn't like hearing an old folk singer. It was like hearing a ghost whisper something only you were meant to hear. Dan couldn't stop listening. Then he started researching, and that research turned into an obsession. He contacted Connie's surviving family. He asked questions no one had asked in 50 years. And what he found stunned him. She wasn't just a forgotten singer. She was the prototype. Before Bob Dylan, before Joni Mitchell, before Leonard Cohen, there was Connie. And she had lived and died in complete obscurity. Dan and his partner David Herman compiled the tapes,
cleaned the audio, and built the first ever collection of her music. In 2009, they released How Sad, How Lovely, a posthumous debut for a woman who hadn't been seen since the Nixon administration. And then something remarkable happened. People started listening. Bloggers discovered her. Folk artists began covering her songs. Radio stations played her voice late at night. One track, Talkin' Like You, Two Tall Mountains, was featured on NPR and later appeared in indie films and art installations. Her lyrics, which once felt like riddles to an empty room, suddenly felt prophetic. Her loneliness echoed the modern age. Her anxiety matched the digital disconnection of the 21st century. Her metaphors, once too obscure, now felt raw and real. A line from one of her songs, "We have our secrets and our plans, we all have our dreams to hide," felt like a post-it note left for the future. And yet, as her voice rose from the dead, the mystery only deepened. Where had she gone? Why did she leave? Was it really a disappearance or a carefully orchestrated escape? Her family, though private, shared glimpses. Her brother Philip, a respected political scientist, said Connie had always been restless, a woman of deep intellect and pain. She loved intensely. She read everything. But she felt like an alien in her time, a 21st century soul trapped in the 1950s. The world didn't offer her what she needed. There were no words for what she was. Back then, a woman like Connie, with no husband, no children, no church, no career ladder, was an anomaly, a problem to be solved. Her neighbors said she was polite but distant, always thinking, always somewhere else. Sometimes you'd hear music from her window, but mostly silence. And it's that silence that haunts us, because in that silence there's a possibility that she's still out there, that she survived. There were rumors. In the early 2000s, someone claimed to have seen a woman matching Connie's description in a remote part of Oregon, living off the grid. Another claimed she changed her name and became a writer in Canada. A third swore she had taken up residence in a monastic community somewhere in the Adirondacks. None of these were proven, but none were disproven either. And then, in 2014, something even stranger happened. A letter surfaced. It was never confirmed. It had no signature, but it was postmarked from New Mexico. The letter was addressed to the archivist. Inside were 2 sentences typed on a yellowed sheet of paper. "Please stop looking. I was never lost. I just left." There was no way to trace it. The envelope had no return address. The typewriter ink didn't match anything on file. And yet, it sounded like her. The phrasing, the cadence, the choice of the word archivist, as if she knew someone was stitching her story together.
Watching from the shadows. Was it a hoax? Or had she written it herself? Even the experts weren't sure. One forensic linguist analyzed the sentence structure and tone. "It's consistent," he said. "It's plausible, but without more material we'll never know." And maybe that's the point. Connie Converse was always disappearing, even in her music, even in her letters. There was always something withheld, a veil, a pause, a line she wouldn't cross. She didn't want to be known entirely. She wanted to be heard, yes, but not captured. And now, in an era of constant exposure, that desire feels revolutionary. Because we live in a time where everything is documented, everything is shared. Privacy is a myth. And yet, Connie Converse managed to do something no one else could. She vanished completely. And then she was found. Through her art, not her body. That's the twist. She disappeared in 1974, but she reappeared in our lives 40 years later, through a song, through a single voice, on a dusty reel-to-reel tape, and through the eyes of a generation that finally understood her. The rediscovery of Connie Converse didn't come with flashing headlines or viral fanfare. It came, like her music always had, quietly, at night, with headphones on and a single voice curling out of the silence like smoke from a forgotten fire. It was always the silence around her that said the most. Her songs didn't scream. They didn't beg for attention. They whispered. And once you heard them, they didn't let go. Listeners described feeling haunted, not because the music was ghostly, but because it felt like she was still there, as if each chord held a fingerprint, as if she'd stepped out of the room only moments before the reel began spinning. Some said they heard in her voice the exhaustion of being alive too early. Others said they heard a woman speaking directly to the future. Her lyrics had no gimmicks, no rhyming crutches. They were stories, small, perfect vignettes. A woman smoking a cigarette on a fire escape. A sailor lying drunk at the bottom of a bar. A night when nobody came home. A love that wasn't returned. The ordinary heartbreak of being invisible. And perhaps that's what people recognized, because by the 2010s, invisibility had become epidemic. We had social media, cameras in every hand, connectivity that buzzed and pinged and chirped, but still millions of people felt like Connie, alone in a crowd, unknown even when they were seen, speaking to a world that didn't speak back. She had been their voice long before they realized they had one. The album How Sad, How Lovely was streamed quietly, then relentlessly. Music blogs called her the first female singer-songwriter of modern music. NPR called her the most tragically overlooked artist of the 20th century. And artists, dozens of them, began covering her work. Cult bands like Big Thief, indie voices, even mainstream vocalists brought her lyrics back to life on stages she'd never seen. In the middle of it all, the central mystery deepened. Not just where she had gone, but why. She had vanished so perfectly. No body, no witness, no incident. People disappear all the time, but very few do it so cleanly that not even time can find them. There was something surgical in the way she left, as if she had rehearsed it like a last song. Pack the car, write the letters, choose the road, never return. The letters she left behind are archived now, preserved in digital scans and private collections. They're composed, articulate, even affectionate. But underneath them, you can feel the weight, a sense of finality. Not an impulsive escape, but a measured exit. One of her final notes read, "Let me go. Let me be. I'll try to find a way to be happy, or at least less tired." And in those last 8 words, or at least less tired, a universe opens up. Because this wasn't someone who couldn't go on. It was someone who didn't want to go on like this, in this world, in this time, in a place that had no space for her. Music historians have tried to piece her life back together. Friends have been interviewed, neighbors tracked down, but each memory only complicates the puzzle. One friend remembers Connie as funny, witty, a lover of wine and absurd stories. Another says she was intense, cerebral, always disappearing into her own thoughts. Some remembered her laughing. Others remembered her crying without a sound. No one version of her fits. And perhaps that's the answer. Connie Converse was a constellation of contradictions. Deeply intellectual, but emotionally raw. Reserved, but fiercely opinionated. Invisible, but unforgettable. The kind of person who could sit next to you on a bus
and you'd never know she had written 50 songs that would one day define a generation she never lived to see. In 2016, a new theory emerged. An anonymous email arrived at a small folk music journal. The sender claimed to have worked at a community hospital in the Pacific Northwest in the late 1980s. He described a patient, female, older, suffering from amnesia. No ID, no known family. She spoke rarely, but occasionally quoted poetry. She played chords on her fingers, hummed folk tunes. When asked her name, she said, "It doesn't matter now." The staff called her Jane. She died in 1991. Could it have been her? Could Connie Converse have erased her past so completely, even from herself? The email was never verified. The hospital, now demolished, had no records. But the timing, the location, the manner, they matched. And if it wasn't her, the fact that so many wanted it to be, wanted closure, even in mystery, says everything. There's something in us that needs stories to end, needs the last page, the final scene. But Connie's story resists that. Her silence continues to ripple. And strangely, her music keeps resurfacing in the most unexpected places. A college student in Denmark used her track Empty Pocket Waltz in a thesis film. A TikTok creator layered her song over footage of lost cities. A podcast sampled her lyrics as part of a spoken word meditation on time, loss, and identity. In 2021, a New York art gallery installed an exhibit called The Woman Who Disappeared Herself. It featured an empty room. In the center, a reel-to-reel machine. Every hour, it played one of Connie's songs. The only other item in the room was a small framed photo of a woman turning away from the camera.
That was the point, to be heard but not seen, to be remembered but not captured. Because that's what Connie Converse did. She walked away from a life that didn't understand her, and in doing so, created a myth more powerful than any headline. She became the voice of everyone who ever felt alone in their brilliance, everyone who ever whispered a truth into the void, everyone who ever wondered what it would feel like to vanish, not out of despair, but out of choice. And still, her guitar lingers, the recordings crackle, the tapes hiss, her voice slides between the noise like a memory caught on the edge of sleep. Her songs don't sound old, they sound timeless, as if she recorded them this morning in a room with no clocks. A voice from the past that somehow feels like it was always meant for us. That's the miracle. Connie Converse left this world in silence, and yet she's never stopped singing. If you listen closely, really closely, you'll hear it. Not in the busy streets, not in the chatter of headlines or the click of fame chasing its next victim, but in the quiet places, the back rooms, the still hours between midnight and morning. That's where Connie Converse still lives. On turntables turning slowly at 3 a.m., on headphones pressed against tear-streaked cheeks in dark dorm rooms, on dusty radios left on after the world's gone to bed. Her music is not loud, not insistent. It doesn't demand anything of you. It simply waits, like she always did, for someone to truly listen. In the years following the release of How Sad, How Lovely, something strange happened. Fans began writing letters, hundreds of them, not to Dan Duzla, not to NPR, not to her estate, but to Connie herself. They sent them to nowhere, to P.O. boxes, to old addresses, to the wind. Some were confessions, some were thanks, some were just pieces of their lives, offered to a stranger who somehow made them feel less alone. One letter read, "Dear Connie, I don't know where you went, but I hope it's peaceful. Your songs found me when nothing else did. I think you saved my life."
Another, "You wrote about things I never had words for. I still don't, but you did, and that was enough." There is no evidence she ever saw them, and yet you can't help but wonder. Because what is music if not a message in a bottle? What is a song if not a letter to the future? Maybe Connie knew exactly what she was doing. Maybe she walked away because she understood something most people never do, that sometimes to truly be heard, you must first disappear. There's an ache to her story that's impossible to shake, a kind of beautiful, unbearable stillness, like a film reel ending mid-frame, like a melody cut off at the final note. You're left waiting for something more, knowing it won't come. But maybe that was always the point. Maybe the story doesn't end because it was never meant to. Connie's music continues to spread, not like wildfire, but like mist, slowly, softly. It finds its way into new ears, new hearts. People sample her, they remix her, they sing her songs with trembling reverence, not because they know her, but because they feel her. And in doing so, they become part of her story.
In 2023, a young artist in Tokyo uploaded a hand-animated music video to YouTube. It was a simple pencil sketch, a woman walking through rain holding a paper umbrella, her face always turned away. The soundtrack? Connie's Roving Woman. In 48 hours, the video had 2 million views, but no hashtags, no tags at all, just one sentence in the description. She never came back, but she left the door open. There's no telling how far her voice will go, or how many lives it will touch, because her story isn't just about disappearance, it's about persistence, the persistence of art, the persistence of soul, the persistence of a woman who, even when she vanished, refused to be silenced. And yet there is still that question, that eternal question, the one that has kept amateur sleuths and music historians and midnight thinkers awake for decades. Where did she go? And was it escape or something darker? Some believe she ended her life, that the fatigue she wrote of finally overcame her, that she drove into the woods or the water or the quiet end of a forgotten road. Others believe she reinvented herself, moved west, changed names, grew older in peace, far from the noise of a world that had always misunderstood her. And then there's a third theory, the strangest one, the idea that she never disappeared at all, that maybe she became part of the very fabric of the world she left behind, that her spirit dissolved into the chords and static of her recordings, that she became her own myth, a kind of living song echoing forward across generations. Maybe that's why people feel like they've seen her in train stations, in bookstores, in dreams. Maybe she's not a ghost, but a frequency, not a person, but a signal, one you can only catch when everything else is quiet. There is something sacred in that, because in the end, Connie Converse may not belong to history. She may belong to the in-between, the liminal space between presence and absence, between voice and silence, between who we are and who we wish we could become. She was a woman who lived without a map, who wrote songs before anyone was listening, who vanished without applause, and who, decades later, returned, not in body, but in song. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. So, the next time you find yourself awake at some unreasonable hour, when the rest of the world is sleeping and you're not sure why you feel like crying, put on a pair of headphones.
press play on a song called One by One, or Father Neptune, or We Lived Alone, and listen, not just to the music, but to the space between the lines, the static, the breath, the silence. Because somewhere in that silence, she's still there. Connie, the woman who disappeared herself, the voice that refused to vanish.